She was building her cabin one log at a time. The sound of her hammer echoed through the valley, sharp, steady, and stubborn. Each strike carried more than muscle, it carried defiance. Winter clouds rolled low across the Montana sky, and the mountains wore their white crowns with silent pride. But she kept working, sleeves rolled up, breath ghosting in the cold air, face flushed from the effort. Her name was Clara Hayes, a woman no taller than a fence post, but built of raw will. Across the field, leaning against a rail fence, a cowboy watched. He'd come every morning, pretending to check his cattle or mend wire, but his eyes always found her. His name was Luke Callahan, and 3 winters ago, he'd buried his wife beneath a sycamore tree when fever took her and their unborn child. Since then, he'd lived in the quiet shadow of what used to be, a widower too afraid to hope again. The first time he saw Clara, she was unloading lumber from a borrowed wagon, her hands blistered and her jaw set like iron. She'd come alone, bought 20 acres of scrubland that most folks said wasn't worth the tax on it, and declared she'd build herself a home. People whispered she was crazy, a woman out here, alone, no kin, no man, no sense. But Luke didn't see crazy. He saw courage. Need a hand with that, he'd asked her once, tipping his hat, voice low, careful not to startle her. She'd looked up, squinting against the sun, a smear of dirt across her cheek. "No, thank you," she'd said. "Hands that didn't start this work shouldn't finish it." That answer stuck with him for days. He understood the pride in it, the hunger to prove something, not to anyone else, but to the ghost of failure that followed her around. He knew that ghost. It had a face, a name, and a headstone. By the time spring melted the snow, Clara's cabin had walls. Uneven, maybe, but solid. Smoke rose from a makeshift chimney, and at night, a single lamp glowed through the window like a stubborn star. Luke still watched from afar, though some days he'd bring small offerings, a sack of flour left by her door, a coil of rope, a basket of apples from his trees. She never said thank you, but he'd find the baskets returned empty, scrubbed clean, a small token of her own silent gratitude. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something quieter, respect, recognition, the kind of connection forged not by words, but by the way 2 wounded souls tilt toward each other, drawn by the warmth of shared loneliness. Then one evening, the wind came roaring down from the mountains. A spring storm. It tore shingles from roofs, ripped branches from trees, and turned the sky to chaos. Luke saddled his horse and rode out to check on his cattle, but as he neared the ridge, lightning split the sky, and there was Clara's cabin, the roof half gone, her lantern blown out, her small figure fighting against the wind to hold a tarp over the opening. He didn't think. He rode straight through the storm, dismounted, and grabbed the other end of the tarp. "You'll get yourself killed," he shouted over the wind. "I told you, I don't need." Her words cut off as a branch crashed nearby. Together they fought the storm, hammering nails through the canvas, securing what they could. By the time it was done, they were soaked, shivering, covered in mud, and breathing hard. Inside the cabin, the fire had gone out, the floor was wet, and rain still hissed through the gaps. Clara sank onto a crate, her hair plastered to her face. "I had it under control," she said softly, but her voice trembled. Luke crouched down, struck a match, and relit the fire. "Sure you did," he said with a small smile. "But no harm in having a little backup." For the first time, she didn't argue. That night, while the storm raged, he sat on the floor near the fire, drying his hat. She sat across from him, silent. When the thunder rolled, she whispered, "I used to hate storms. My husband, he was a trapper, died in one just like this." Her eyes glimmered in the firelight, the pain still raw though years had passed. Luke swallowed hard. "My wife too," he said quietly. "Fever took her. I couldn't save her." For a long moment, the cabin was only the sound of rain and 2 broken hearts remembering how to breathe. The storm passed before dawn. When Luke left, the first light was spilling across the wet fields, and Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. He tipped his hat and rode away, the ache in his chest not quite grief anymore, something softer, something dangerous. Days turned to weeks. The cabin grew more beautiful, one log at a time, until it looked less like a defiance and more like a dream. Wildflowers bloomed around it, and a tiny garden sprouted behind. Luke began stopping by openly now, bringing supplies or staying for coffee. Sometimes they worked side by side without speaking, the silence comfortable as an old song. Then one afternoon, While fixing her fence, Luke noticed a rider in the distance, a stranger. When he got closer, Clara's expression changed. The man dismounted, grinning. "Well, if it isn't little Clara Hayes. Thought you'd run off east for good." Her face went pale. "What do you want, Bill?" Luke stayed still, reading the tension. The man's tone was mocking. "Just came to see what you built on my family's land." "Your father sold it fair," she said sharply. "Yeah, but you didn't pay me what you owed. I reckon that means this place ain't yours yet." Luke stepped forward, his voice calm but edged. "She paid for every board and nail. Best ride on." Bill looked him up and down. "Who's this?" "Her hired hand." Luke's eyes didn't waver. "A friend." The man spat in the dirt. "Ain't no place for a woman alone out here. You'll come back to town when you realize it." He swung into his saddle and rode off, leaving dust and tension behind. Clara stood rigid, fists clenched. Luke wanted to say something, but instead, he picked up the hammer she dropped. "We'll need a stronger gate," he said softly. "Wind and wolves both like weak fences." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her eyes thawed. "Then let's build one," she said. That night, as they worked beneath the stars, Luke realized he wasn't just helping her anymore. He was rebuilding himself. Each nail driven, each board raised, it wasn't just a cabin being built. It was two lives stitching together at the seams. By midsummer, Clara's home was finished. The townsfolk who once laughed now came to see it, strong, handsome, smelling of pine and fresh hope. They congratulated her, some out of genuine pride, others out of guilt for doubting her. But when the crowd left, Luke lingered by the fence, hat in hand. "You did it," he said. "We did," she replied softly. He smiled. "Maybe, but it was your fire that kept it going." She hesitated, then asked, "You ever think about starting over, Luke?" He looked toward the horizon. "Every day, but starting over takes two." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, of fear, and longing, and something dangerously close to love. Weeks later, tragedy came quietly. Clara fell ill. Nothing serious at first, just a fever. But out here, small things turn grave. Luke found her weak, trying to split wood. He lifted her in his arms despite her protest and laid her in bed. For 2 days, he stayed by her side, bringing water, soup, and prayers. He barely slept. On the third morning, when she woke, the fever had broken. "You didn't have to," she whispered, voice rough. He smiled faintly. "You'd have done the same." Tears filled her eyes. "I was so scared. I thought I'd lose everything again." He took her hand. "You didn't. You still got the cabin. And me, if you'll have either." Her answer was a soft sob that turned into laughter. "You're stubborn, cowboy, only when it matters." From that day, he never rode past her gate without stopping. They began sharing small pieces of life, coffee at dawn, supper at dusk, fixing the barn roof, talking about nothing and everything. He taught her how to mend tack, she taught him how to make jam from wild berries. Slowly, gently, they healed. Autumn came early that year, painting the hills gold. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Luke brought a small box to her porch. Inside was a simple silver ring, nothing fancy, but worn smooth from years in his pocket. "This was my wife's," he said softly. "I kept it because I thought letting go meant forgetting. But I think she'd want me to give it to someone who knows what it means to build something from nothing." Clara's breath caught. "Luke," he held her gaze, "I ain't asking for a promise you can't make. I just want to know if you'll let me build beside you. Not your cabin, your life." Tears glistened on her lashes as she whispered, "You already have." They married quietly that winter, under the same sycamore where Luke had once buried his past. It snowed that morning, soft flakes falling like blessings. The preacher's voice was gentle, the vows simple. When he kissed her, it felt less like a beginning and more like coming home. Years later, travelers passing through the valley would see the cabin, a bigger one now, smoke rising from its chimney, laughter spilling from the porch where children played. They'd hear the story of the woman who built her home one log at a time, and the cowboy who watched from afar until he remembered how to love again. Sometimes, when the night grew quiet, Luke would step outside and look up at the stars. Clara would come to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "You ever think we'd make it this far?" She'd whisper. He'd smile, eyes soft. "Didn't think I'd make it at all until you showed up." And she'd lean her head on his shoulder, the mountain standing witness, the fire inside their home glowing steady as the day they first built it. They'd both lost once, but together, They'd built something storms couldn't tear down, proof that love, like a cabin, lasts longest when built one honest, patient log at a time.